Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Morning Bible. Cards on the table, I might be a little bit less excitable today. Just having a bit of a rubbish few days, but that's fine because I've got a God who is God in the rubbish days as much as He's God in the good days. And His Bible is just as powerful, if not slightly more relevant in the hard times. So let's just jump straight into it. We are still in Luke. We are Luke chapter 7 today. We're doing, I was going to do from 11 till much further, but there's quite a big chunk on John the Baptist that I figured I'd leave for tomorrow because that's quite an interesting passage. So today's one's probably going to be quite short as a result. And it's Jesus raising the widow's son. So let's just go straight into it. Verse 11. Soon after, he went out to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a great crowd went with him. As he drew near to the gate of the town, behold, a man who had died was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and a considerable crowd from the town was with her. So Jesus comes to this town, and as he arrives, he sees a funeral procession coming out. Something we're sadly quite familiar with at the moment. In this particular case, it's a woman who is taking her son to be buried, and it says that she's a widow, and that he is her only son. And so the context of this is that women at the time couldn't really support themselves. It was the men who worked typically and brought in the money, and so the fact that she didn't have a husband and now didn't have a son meant that this woman was in a really quite desperate situation that she was facing up to. And so this would have been really scary, really horrible time for her, and a time that I'm sure quite a lot of us feel like we're in the middle of at the moment. But there is hope that comes from this. Verse 13. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her, and said to her, "Do not weep." And then he came and he touched the bier, and the bearers stood still. So the bier is it's like the board that they carry the body on. It's kind of like an open funeral type situation where they'll have the body sat on a board so that people can see who it is. So Jesus came over and he touches this bier, and that's quite a big deal for the time. So traditionally in Jewish law, if you touched a dead body, came into contact with a dead body, then you were made ceremonially unclean. Now that isn't the same as being sinful or having done something wrong. It just means that you are now unclean. You can't go and do certain religious practices. You can't do certain things because you're unclean, and you need to offer sacrifices and follow various rules to cleanse yourself of this. And so the fact that Jesus goes up to this bier and touches it is really significant. It shows that Jesus isn't afraid of being made unclean, but it's more than that. It's that Jesus can't be made unclean. Jesus is cleanliness, and Jesus brings that with him, and so he has no fear of touching death. He has no fear of coming into contact with death, because he knows that he won't be made unclean by it. And so I think that's a little takeaway from this already. That's a nice challenge for us of are there times where we don't bring Jesus into this because we don't want him to interact with the darker parts of our life. We say we don't want Jesus to come into contact with this kind of stuff because this feels bad. Do we not want him to come into times where we're dealing with death? Well, actually no, Jesus is ultimately clean, and he doesn't, he can touch the bier, he can touch this thing, and it won't taint him, it won't bring him down. Let's keep reading. And also, he says to her, "Do not weep." That's the first thing he says. He doesn't come in and say, get out of the way everyone, I'll heal him, it's all good. He comes in and tells the widow, "Do not weep." He comforts her first. He offers her compassion and love first before doing anything else. And then Jesus says, "Young man, I say to you, arise." And the dead man sat up and began to speak, and Jesus gave him to his mother. So that's pretty crazy. That's a big miracle. That's a really big miracle. Fear seized them all. So this is the crowd that was around all of the funeral procession. Fear seized them all, and they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet has arisen among us, and God has visited his people." And this report about Jesus spread through the whole of Judea and all of the surrounding country. So these people, they see this happen, and quite naturally they freak out. They're really scared by it. I think we all would be. But there you can see the power of Jesus, because they don't just get scared and run away. They get scared and go, "This is God. We're in the presence of God." What they say exactly? God has visited his people. They recognise what this is, and so rather than running away in fear and having all this kind of reaction, which would totally be expected, these people start worshipping. And that's such a powerful takeaway again for our present time. Is how often when we're in the midst of fear, do we worship? That's quite a big challenge. Are you ever scared? Are you ever worried about things and then turn around and sing praises to God in the midst of that? That's quite a big challenge, but that's what we're called to do. And then the report spreads through the whole of Judea and all the surrounding country. So, these people, they talk as you would. They're going around their normal days saying, "Hey, guess what we've seen, guess what we've seen, guess what we've seen." And that's, I guess, the last takeaway from today's passage is, when you see Jesus move, when you see Jesus act like this, when you see something real take place in the world, you can't help but run around and tell people. It's a really powerful moment where, you see God come down and God act and see God do something. And it's so important in those moments when you feel that excitement, when you feel that sort of shock and awe, that you tell people about it, that you go around and spread the good news of that, because it's really powerful and that'll touch a lot of lives. So that's where I'm going to end it today. Tomorrow, John the Baptist is making a return. We haven't seen him for a little while. I'm really excited to read about that. But until then, I hope you all stay safe, stay indoors, do all the rest of it, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Much love.